the problem is that I don't know, like I've been talking at the moment lots about ego. I've got all these spiritual people here, and there's this big discussion about ego, and I'm working with a lama now. So my
Mm-hmm.
spiritual connection, because of this issue with the kids, I think has been kind of lost. So direct descendant of Tibetan, heritage, and this understanding of no ego, or ego death that Westerners love the idea of. And I kind of argue with everyone going, as far as a Westerner is concerned, a non-monk, it is impossible to have an ego death, because you and I would not be sitting here talking right now without ego.
Mm-hmm.
So we're
Mm-hmm.
all trying to kill this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember very clearly when I went through the toughest part of my journey, and I hated my ego because it was presented to me that my ego was the cause of all my problems. And
Right.
so, of course, what Aaron does is he went on a warpath with his ego. And
Mm-hmm.
then eventually I sat with this incredible woman, a woman who smuggled herself into prison when I was in there. This pocket, man, this woman was life-changing for me. And she said, "You can't hate yourself." And I just kind of went, yeah, you can't, because how can you go to war and want to kill a part of you?
Mm-hmm.
You can't. That goes against the very nature of our existence, to say that this thing that is sneaky, don't get me wrong, it's a sneaky, cheeky little thing that hijacks parts of us. Sometimes the most beautiful parts of it can stay hidden.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go to war with it, what's it going to do? It's going to hide. It's going to suppress. It's going to attach itself, or what I say is, it hijacks your spirituality. It
Mm-hmm.
hijacks the word love. It hijacks the word compassion. It hijacks the word kindness. We see it with people going at shooting video of themselves being nice to people. And again, I'm not going to take away them doing it, because they're still being nice.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to destroy that. But
Mm-hmm.
it hijacks I said yesterday, and it's not a great term, ego life. It's not ego death. When you know it's alive and
Mm-hmm.
you learn to respect it,
Mm-hmm.
and you hold it up and say, "This is my ego,"
Mm-hmm.
then it doesn't need to hide anymore. And so you actually get to see it for what it is. You get to respect it for what it is. And it doesn't start barring away and hijacking things, because it says, "Okay, you're acknowledging my presence. And yes, we don't always get on. Yes, I will do things that are driven by subconscious connections and conditioning from childhood. But if I look at you and go, oh, I know you, I understand you, then I'm not spending a ton of my energy and a ton of my time in this lifetime trying to destroy
Mm-hmm.
part of me."
As usual, you and I seem to link up pretty effortlessly, and I'm super stoked about it because that makes things just resonant and effortless. And I hear everything that you're saying, and you know this about me already, as I was at times in my experience far swept up into the new age BS portion of, or this, let's just call it an attempt. I think it's an authentic, intentional attempt.
We need to be clear that you say that early, because someone will listen to this and go, well, hang on, you're discounting.
Yeah.
These are not bad. This is not bad. I did this myself. This is not bad people. And I'd rather they be doing that than doing what we might have done 40 years ago. So I don't want people to stop what they're doing. But what I'd like to know is, we're evolving creatures. So let's evolve past the
Mm-hmm.
part now where the ego's motivating that, and put our egos up on show and say, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So exactly. I'm glad that we discussed that, because you're right. I think that's a big issue with the conflict that we have right now, is the inability to remember where we came from, and also the inability to lack vision of where we may be going next. And then there's that judgment and that conflict, and going through the aspect of, let's call it the new age, and the spiritual concept of kill the ego, and let's actually, from what I know now, it benefited me. But what I couldn't see within my consumption of going through that process, because I believe that sometimes there is an intentional, I would say an unconscious intentional blindness, so you can fully have a direct experience. Coming through it, what I realize now is that I latched on too long to it, which cultivated a rapid continuation of disassociation, actually. So at some point, I believe for myself, if you stay in a theme when it's extended its visit, you overextend your visit, it actually has the inverse, it starts to have the inverse effect. But then I think we latch on to more people or more stories to try to hang on to that ideology or concept.
Yeah, we want to feed the place of comfort we've created. So we bring in, like you just said, we bring in more, or we consume more of what it is. It's like the idea of people who'll tell me that when I talk about screen time, and I'll say, oh, but I consume only books about this and books about, I'll go, but hang on a second, it's still a screen, and you still need to be aware that it is still consumption. And if you spend all of your time buried in a screen, listening and watching someone else, you're not really doing much with it. Still the same, can have the same effect. So yeah, I agree fully that we need to be evolving creatures. And the reality is we are part of nature, and nature's one consistent is its change. Yet we don't like that change. And what happens is, even when we move into a realm which we deem as good and healthy, we get stuck in it. And so we feel it's time to stop moving. And, it's a spiral. We need to keep slowly edging out so that spiral continues to grow. Because even if that circle that we create is full of Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza and Tony Robbins, it is still a circle. It is still a choice to say, I don't want to evolve past this point anymore. And it is really necessary right now more than ever that we evolve more. And if that means getting it wrong in our evolution, fine, but at least we're moving forward.
Yeah.
And we are. And like we've talked about this many times, when we look at the sickness around us, there's this indignation, self-righteousness, people refusing to open up and listen,
or being terrified to do it. And I think in what you're saying, I just want to add, I believe that this feeling that we're describing, this kind of inability to see clearly, maybe, is because I believe that there's so much of an environmental focus, like a relational focus to find meaning and love, that we are selling ourselves to the environment, and that's cultivating that maybe grandiosity, so to speak, that we're misrepresenting, or we're not seeing clearly, as maybe just hanging on to a narrative too long, like that environmental pressure, or that you got to do what we're doing, fit into the club kind of thing.
It kind of is, and I guess it's kind of probably a remnant still of our tribal ancestry that we want to fit in. And I guess that's where different personality types differ. Like we will sit there and actually do the opposite of try to fit in. And this is why we get to have these conversations which kind of are expansive and push beyond. It's how, and remember we've asked this question, is how do we communicate to these other people, not to change their personality types, but to open up and take
to just talk.
Yeah, exactly. And not have to agree, because this is what, the very nature of what we're doing here is 10 times more powerful if we added a third person who disagreed with us. Because we would be then expanding upon, because we would have to stretch to think about, where does this come from that I'm now trying to talk to another person who doesn't understand it? And then they present their idea, and we don't see, we've talked about this many times, this inability to respectfully disagree.
Right. Now, I want to share with you something that a couple things that have come up very recently, and I'm grateful that we were brought right here directly. One way in which my bubble bursted and expanded recently has been several discussions I've had with some friends who focus on inner work, and what they're attempting to do, as you and I have also discussed endlessly, is to take richly complex esoteric material and simplify it. So these particular folks I'm working with are exceptionally intelligent, very educated, a lot of Jungian theory, a lot of the old psychologists, a lot of the deep, darker elements of psychology, and they know it really well. But we're all trying to simplify the material to the degree where a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old could actually grasp it. And this constantly proves to be challenging. And we constantly go back in to see where we can simplify even more. Now, the one gentleman, him and his partner, they have a company called Shadow Tech Alchemy. And they do a lot of very deep translations of Jungian and several other wonderful, brilliant psychologists and philosophers' work. They kind of deconstruct it. And I've done a couple. You introduced me to a gentleman named Robert L. Moore. And I can share that with you off screen. Colin, who's the gentleman from Shadow Tech Alchemy, said you got to listen to these of his lectures from the past on there. And Colin and I have had some significant conversations about trying to present this work, this has been another challenge for me. And I know you and I have talked about this, is as we're evolving and shifting, we're also trying to embrace this healthy new way of presenting ourselves that feels really authentic. And with a business or any entrepreneurial work comes all sorts of business management and marketing and all this other kind of stuff. And what's been so interesting, how do I really authentically do my work in the world in a way that's supportive of me, but also in a way that really feels aligned with myself, that I'm not really selling out when I say that, just connecting with the right people. And, it's not a mainstream life coaching kind of stuff that we're really doing or
That's what
attracted
I've
to.
stopped calling, and I've stopped calling myself a life coach because I tended to understand that I'm more a mentor.
Right. And I've done the same thing.
Because I work from experience as much as I've got bits of paper and I've got that. The reality for me is it's about experience, and mentors work from experience. Coaches are working from script now and working from
right.
So, and that's not to insult them. That's just the nature of that industry. It's become incredibly lucrative. And so with that lucrative aspect to it, it's attracted a different type of person. Right. I believe we're mentors.
I believe that actually in what I've seen, and I'm only seeing a small portion of the entirety, obviously, but what I see a lot is a lot of life coaching that's taking on this role of the people who are coming aren't necessarily, they're coming to learn, but they're also coming to become the life coach too. And a lot of this kind of hijacking the process, you've worked the process. And this is the mentoring that I think you're referring to, is there's a level of, we've spent a significant time with significant experience working this process and continue to actively engage in our own process while we're working with you. And it's more of a let's walk together than let me tell you what I'm doing to help create or help you to accomplish your goals. So there's this beautiful kind of, I would call it the divine feminine, the wisdom of the feminine, coupling with the elements of the goal orientation or the life coach, the ego, in a way where we understand this isn't something to kill. That's very much of that masculine warrior-esque type of energy. But in fact, to, like you said, befriend and try to understand its unmet needs and really try to cultivate this relationship where you're witnessing it arise in you, and you are developing a relationship where you can regulate what's arising without it being so self or other destructive. And I think
it's getting the choice, getting to choose. You basically get to choose. You get that ability to take a breath and go, do I want to allow my ego to run here? It's ambitious. Yeah, I do want to let it this time because it's going to take me to an interview that I may have been fearful of. So my ego here actually benefits me. But do I want to when it's going to be in a manipulative situation where it's a relationship issue with a family issue? No, I don't want to. So all we're asking for is, and this is what awareness used to mean before it kind of got hijacked by the personal development world. It's the awareness to look at something and have a pause. The simple pause. Not that we could talk about all the ifs and buts. It's the pause and go, no, I don't want that 4-year-old version of myself to make this decision. Right. I'm going to actually say, I love you for being that 4-year-old. But no, you don't rule this shot,
It's important to clarify what you just said, that working towards becoming self-aware doesn't mean that you're going to be happy all the time or still make the right choices. You're just going to be aware that it's one step backwards of just a reaction. Now, sometimes just a reaction is necessary, and that shouldn't be shamed either.
Yes. And you learn. And there's a second part of awareness is that you get to choose to learn from your experiences. So you don't go along for 12 months of your life and go, what happened? And then you go back and you reflect. Awareness is about the ability to learn as you go. Yeah. So as you do make the errors and you do have a bad day and you do manipulate or you lie and you get, and within that moment you go, whoa, and to me, that's kind of what I'm working more with people now is giving this ability to learn from life.
Right. Not being afraid to be open and vulnerable, yet courageous about your own process.
Yeah.
I think this is really important. I want to bring up something really important, continuation from Robert Moore and the ego, is that because I had polarized for so long trying to spiritualize myself out of my ego, right? The spiritual bypass that I was involved in. Funny because I was brought up in a strict kind of Protestant household. And I think I mentioned this before, that there was a lot of contradiction in thought, emotion, and action. Although there was this core morality running through and an expression of what I should be and do, my models weren't necessarily demonstrating that too well. And for a young child, I didn't have the emotional literacy to really, I could just witness, well, what I'm being told to do and what my restrictions aren't what's being demonstrated to me as a child. So because I polarized into the yoga thing, which again worked really well for me for a period of time, but then I overstayed my visit. And overstaying that visit and then coming back down, grounding myself into this, being who had a level of self-awareness and could begin to take healthy action again, wishing away, you are quite disassociated at times. And yes, there's a level of creativity and connection that I think is very important there, but I think that for me personally it went way too far. And then at some point I just wasn't doing the very basic groundwork and taking the actions that I needed to take to make sure my unmet needs were getting met. This was my bubble bursting moment, was Robert Moore was talking about this kind of other side of what we're talking about, of kind of befriending the ego and really addressing your grandiosity. This is what he and how he refers to it. And he's saying that there's a bunch of people out there, which I really identified with, who maybe have had, I don't want to say struggle, but maybe I'll use the word struggles, trying to package and demonstrate my work in a way that really felt aligned with my heart and soul. And he was talking about, for some people, you actually need to cultivate a little more grandiosity because there's a little bit of fear. And actually, there are certain people who have to, if you want to transmit your alchemical gold within you, he says, you got to have a little grandiosity to be really expressing and putting that vision out there. And if you're afraid of it, like sometimes we're afraid of that alchemical gold when we get that taste of what we're capable of, because we want it to be right. We want it to be pure. We don't want it to get muddied. We have these high expectations of the purity of what it is that we're trying to do, that certain people have a hard time actually with incorporating that extra level of ego or grandiosity to be able to really push it out. And when I heard him talking about this, I really thought, wow, that actually is more of my struggle. It's not so much about addressing or befriending my ego. It's that I'm afraid of it when this healthy side of my ego or healthy confidence or grandiosity wants to come out to get my own alchemical gold out into the world. Moore, who said behind every inferiority complex is a superiority complex. And I'm like, yeah, that's actually really it. So I'm kind of working on this little bit of the inversion. Is my tendency has been to play small a lot and to not push myself out into this world, because I want it to be pure and I want it to be received properly, and too much care and concern about what the other people think out there in the world. And I've really been working on embracing my gift and really realizing that I'm not going to be able to do anything with it unless I show up and really, really show up in this way where I've almost connected with that barrier where, like, I feel safe enough to do this and put myself out there, but like I feel this wall. It's in my mind. I can see it. And it's like, yeah, but I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be like that person. I don't want to be like her. Like, I don't want to be that. So I'm blocking myself. I'm blocking myself from my next step. And I'm more comfortable with the introverts and the intellectuals, and that, like, kind of talking and canoodling in these smaller groups. So I'm trying to give myself permission to be slightly grandiose, and then to do and continue to perform the work it takes to embody that which what I am, that level of grandiosity that I'm trying to establish. Is okay if you want to say it, and then just keep doing the work to make sure you're matching that which what it is that you're saying.
Wow. the birthplace of this, like listening to you go back to talking about your upbringing and being told what to do versus witnessing what was happening. This is the birthplace for all of this. We've come from generations who grew up with this. That was parenting style. Do as I say, not as I do. We all know the saying very well. And it's a really simple birthplace. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking about is the power of language and the word ego. And when I was growing up, ego was attached to the word maniac. That was what
like
I
an
learned. An
egomaniac.
egomaniac. That was that was my definition. And when I deal with clients, one of the first things I do is I get them to define certain words.
Yeah.
There has never been a person I've worked with who has not defined ego as a negative.
Yeah.
And almost all of them will say maniac. Almost all of us as young children either witnessed a parent saying it or in TV or whatever. And the power of that single word and the definition of that single word has created much of what you just spoke about.
You know, what's so interesting
Just,
is this is where I'm going back to, my roots in this kind of masculine, feminine work and the shadow sides of those energies. So the egomaniac would be the shadow side of like an unchecked kind of warrior-esque masculine energy, but nobody talks about the young girl who wants to hide and who's not seen and not valued. This energy of I'm playing small because I wasn't accepted for what I was, or I didn't feel that I was as a child. I couldn't live up to my parents' expectations or the system's expectations, or I had things that I couldn't live up for. So then my ego is always hiding. Is more comfortable in the dark, in the back room, in the back, coming in the back door. So this is something that I think is for a certain group of people out there really needs to be heard, because I think this is the container that a lot of our introverts and a lot of our creative souls live in, this container where I only feel comfortable to put my gold out into the world if it's nonverbal, like an artist, or like somewhere where like how do I verbalize my gift, my goal in this way where I'm used to so deeply going within my soul and my spirit. And, maybe I write a poem, or maybe I perform a song, or it's music, or it's art. It's like this level of feminine and creativity that is essentially nonverbal, kind of like the part of the unconscious that's nonverbal. This is what I want to try to bring to light, because I think that a lot of these people, if they could really cultivate their story and their words and communication behind that gorgeous piece of abstract art, or behind something that's so richly beautiful, if they could find a way to communicate that publicly out in the world, I think that's the energy that we really need to help to shift and integrate more of this kind of heart wisdom with the mind and the intellect. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. And I think the other thing that is incredibly important to me, but is also the hardest struggle or the biggest struggle I'm finding, is a sense of community. We
Well,
are,
that,
as we spoke
yeah.
about earlier, we are tribal creatures, and we have become individualistic. We've become very separated, and that is the nature of the whole, for Westerners especially. And I think that needs to be seriously addressed and talked about more. And I think that when we put ourselves out there like we do, and we talk about this more, and then there's a third person does it, and then a fourth person, then that 17-year-old or 24-year-old who gets to watch that and share, and that understands that I'm not alone.
Yeah, right,
We've
right.
got too many people within the personal development world, spiritual world, whatever you want to call it, who talk by themselves. We're told that value comes in a business from standing there and talking about your experience, about me,
Yeah,
about me,
right,
about me, and
right.
I was in it and I did it. And what I've realized is that this is great for a business because you become the center point for the value, but this is very bad for us as a community. And I try to start
Yes.
think tanks, the idea that we bring more and more people together that don't always agree, again, that have this, if we don't do more of this community building, then
Yeah.
as a species, in all areas of our life, whether it be our spirituality, whether it be our relationships, we're in for some problems, because
Yeah.
our children are just basically mimicking that, and they're becoming more and more individualistic, they're more and more, you know what I mean? So
Yeah. It's so interesting that you're saying this, because just last night I was invited into sort of a think tank community. It's called Toastmasters. I don't know if you've ever heard
yeah, I
of
know that.
that.
Yeah,
I,
yeah, yeah,
I
I've heard of
actually
it.
don't know much about it, but I was invited into a dialogue there. And what I'm trying to share with you, I know that you get it, but it not to be too abstract, but it lives in the ether. It lives in the air, in the spaces, woo-woo terminology, because it's like, well, what I am picking up on the energy that there's just, if you haven't really experienced that, it gets misconstrued as other things. And I remember the gentleman I was talking to said, oh, well, we try not to be like too emotional in this group. And I was like, it's not emotional. Like, I was trying to introduce that in these containers needs to be, I can only explain it as the authentic feminine and the authentic masculine, where there's the structure, there's the safety, there's how, it's okay, you have 7 minutes and then here's your green sign, like, to give everybody a chance to talk. I get that. But I was like, who's reading the collective energy in this room? Who's seeing this man who just exposed his soul and nobody said anything about it? Like, not to get overly emotional, but just to read the room. And this really reminds me of when I used to teach yoga, because, and anybody who does this stuff publicly, I mean, maybe it's different for, in the small contained environment of the yoga studio, because those people were very important to me, very special to me, because they would come see me every week. They were like family. Is you would read the room, but I'm not coming in so structurized that I'm leaving out the room for what needs to be brought up in this moment, because it's beyond me. It's what needs to be exposed through any one of us. And this isn't about me. Very important, rich, structured conversations, but still have room for the component of, how does that make you feel when you say that? Can we talk for a second about what that's bringing up for you?
Yeah, and I think that's just the nature of humans and ego. There's a very good example. Toastmasters, I don't know a lot about, but I know what it is, and I know that it's esoteric. It's about intellect. It may have had its roots somewhere 50 years ago. It's been around a long time, where the idea was to give people from the war or from traumatic situations a space for them to breathe and talk. But we're very different creatures now. And so our depth and complexity of, I guess, understanding of our emotions and the thoughts that go on is I think it's messier, and I think there's more to come out. And I think that process or method has probably outlived itself from my perspective. The kind of think tanks I'm talking about are more like circles. And that might be a shifting group from 8 to 20 people, and one person might talk the whole time. I don't do structure. The universe doesn't do structure. The universe is all about change, flux, and flow. So for me, the idea is to just bring together the right people to expand. It's this evolutionary process.
Yeah.
It's just really about someone stretching my thinking and me going, whoa, me not being able to talk because I actually don't either understand them, or I'm so at odds with what I believed prior to them talking, that's my evolution now going, I need to go and have another look at this. That's what I mean, so that people can feel safe, and the quietest person in the room can open up and all of a sudden completely blow the rest of you away because they feel safe. So for me, these groups are purely about a safe place that is full of respect and true empathy and and a community. Like, they come back, and they may not come back every week, just like your family picnics. The same family may not come. It's about a real sense of community, not a community structured by an organization called Toastmasters, not a community structured by rules and regulations, but a community of people who genuinely, because community is about connection.
Yeah.
It's about empathy, and it's about support.
Yeah.
Can I borrow a couple of, and we don't see much of that in our so-called communities at the moment. We don't see that. We see people really giving poor advice, and, on Facebook group communities. There's no community. There's a word, you want to redefine it. We need to redefine the word community, because it is simple: connection, support, it's empathy. It's, how does this person feel? Do they need my help?
Aaron, I have to tell you that my heart is the feminine within me is screaming, and she's showing me that if we could just be open and authentic and safe, we wouldn't need separate containers and communities and echo chambers and groups and this and that. I know that we need it. I know we desperately need those safe. I'm all there. I'm right there with you. I know exactly what you're saying. And that to me is exactly where I'm at. But that feminine is just showing me like, do you see what we have to do because of
Yeah.
how afraid we are to just be honest with each other? All of these facades, all of these characters and personas and fears we have, like, do you see all the things we have to do to just feel safe to communicate?
That's how bad that's how I say bad it is. That's how bad it's gotten. And that's bombardment. We've chosen to live in a way that we're bombarded by fear. And even those of us who can understand and respect fear for what it is and the media for what it's doing, and we can try and disseminate, there's still an energy.
Yeah.
So it's still out there. So even if we don't watch it,
Yeah.
even if we choose not to listen to the people who espouse it, it doesn't matter. It is still an energy. It still flows throughout the world, and we're outnumbered. And I hate saying that because I'm not the type of person to ever think I'm outnumbered. I kind of think I'm a billion versus one, and I'd take them on in the right. But it's not the reality. It's not the reality. And the spiritual community, especially, has become kind of silly like this, kind of separating themselves away.
Yeah.
And what I'm realizing, it's the work's in the trenches. It's back in there, and it is people talking in these kind of mini communities and trying to grow them from a perspective where we are outnumbered, and the only way is to be an example. It's the actions that we take, not the words that we speak, that will be.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, an intuitive question here is, how are you as a man dealing with feeling outnumbered and challenging that place within you that likes to feel like you can take on what needs to be taken on to get things done? Kind of that warrior energy. Like, how does it feel? How are you dealing with the feeling of knowing, in essence, that we kind of are actually outnumbered? How are you dealing with that energy?
I deal with it by being a dad. And that kind of sounds beautiful, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is I did this once before back in Africa with my other kids. And when I felt the same thing, I hunkered down and I went into this idea that if I was the best dad I could be, that there were two little people here that were going to be better examples, and I was going to equip them better from a very young age. So it wasn't so much of an effort for them because they weren't going to have to try, because it was their choice at a very young age to see and embody it. The problem with that is that I am a good dad, and that is, but that's not all I am. And so I come out swinging again, and I realize I'm still going to be that dad, but that's not all I am. But then I come out and I struggle to connect with community. And this is why I talk about it so strongly. I don't believe, and I've realized I can do this alone. This is all about a single word, is collaboration. It's collaboration. And when you find those right people and we talk more and more, we start saturating with what we're talking about instead of saturation of what they're talking about. Because we can't change what they're going to do, and we can't change what they're going to say. We can't break the media networks. We can't argue with it. We're almost wasting every little piece of energy we are even mentioning they exist. Right. Because we have the creative power and strength within us to actually talk the other way. So we pour everything into that and just respectfully turn away from that.
Right.
And I'm not going to fight it. When you're outnumbered like we are right now, there's no point. Like Russell Brand tries to fight with them. He spends all this energy in, and he's lost his way, in my opinion. The guy had so much potential to change, and he's gotten caught up in the very thing that they are.
Right. Like if he has that reach and that influence, my feeling is I'm right there with you. There is a field of potential. I've been working a lot in this bioenergetic field. I can feel it. I can feel it. I can see it. I can sense it. And I'm thinking to myself, I totally agree with you. Why waste another ounce of energy trying to fight this machine? Why aren't we highlighting? Why isn't somebody like Russell Brand highlighting the people who are doing it right, highlighting the people who are building the new schools, helping to donate to new hospital systems? Why are we still somehow trapped looking backwards and not looking forward into building these communities and not just the community, not just a retreat? I'm talking about the hospital, the banking system, the schooling. Where are the structures? We've got the energy. Now let's actually lay some literal foundation and start to build some of these new systems.
And he could talk about that. The reality is he refuses to. And he's been asked many times. He says, I don't have the answers. And I'm like, but hang on a second. You are the answer, because you have the ability to bring to light new. You have the numbers to create and talk about and plant seeds and bring together people. People believe in him.
Yeah, they do.
And yet what
Right.
he's doing is and I don't doubt that that the need for a light to be shone on what is wrong
Yeah.
isn't necessary, because there are some people out there who are so purely in their minds that in fact only will they change their mind. But he is a spiritual being. He is such a
Right.
spiritual energy. And I
Right.
believe that he spends too much of his time shining the light out at all those terrible bad things,
Yeah.
instead of shining it in where did he get where he was? Because he shone that light in. He went right in, and he doesn't, and he's kind of pushed that aside. And
There's a potential upstream, or like, just to steel man him for a second, is maybe maybe he understands the value in cultivating a sense of righteous anger to
yeah,
motivate. Now that's that slippery slope, though, because a lot of people in and around the spiritual community, or the people who he may be helping to wake up, have been literally trapped in the illusion of the sleep. So maybe sometimes, to as you're waking up, there needs to be a cultivation of this righteous anger to
the
there
rebel.
be a good healthy
Start
motivation,
the rebel. Start the rebel.
right? But at some point, where's the bridge? And maybe he feels his bridge is his spiritual channel. But again, it seems like he has so much more potential to actually
Oh,
start cultivating just these very real world community things of, like, I'm focusing and highlighting this person who's building a new school system, or I'm highlighting this, like the actual tangible groundwork.
yeah, I just think that we've got a lot of people talking about what's going on, and I think that it's quite light. And you're right, he is but one man, and I'd probably be a little bit harsh using him. I use him as an example because he is such a figure,
Yeah.
and he is, and I certainly have no right to sound like I'm being judgmental of him. I just see him as such a powerhouse, and I look at him, if what I believe in his purest form, which is as a creative person, forming bonds and connections with people who are actually
Yes.
creating what it is we'd like to see, instead of
Yeah.
trying to tear the house of cards down, because I don't believe the house of cards will ever fall down
Yeah.
unless there are more of us stacked on the other side. You could
So
give us 50 Russell Brands, and we need people like us, more like us.
this is, again, I'm being mindful of the ways in which I'm potentially projecting too, right? I'm really trying to be in this space as I say these things, to keep myself accountable of my own projections within what I'm saying. But one thing I see, and one thing I genuinely get concerned about, and again, this is a little bit of my own projection within this, is if there's a process towards, let's say there is a process of development between somebody who has no idea about the matrix or awakening, and they're starting to put the pieces together, right? Starting to become aware, starting to question reality, right? Starting to do some research, starting to go down that path. There tends to be a bit of a process. It's not always spontaneous where somebody wakes up, gets it, and is building the new thing reality, right? So if there's this process, and I see this waking up, and I am seeing a lot of people, maybe the masses, kind of take the same process that I took, which is, okay, well, now I'm going to polarize into this non-material aspect of life. And now I'm looking into astrology, and I'm looking into, theosophy. And now I'm going down the esoteric rabbit hole. And now I'm becoming a yoga teacher. And now I'm meditating and manifesting. And now and in my mind, I'm thinking, well, shit, we can't do this, because now it's gonna take another, right? Here's my ego. It's like, okay, now
Yeah.
it's gonna take another 20 years for us to do the thing. And when in reality, guess what, Aaron? We should stop focusing on those people, and we should just do the thing.
Yeah.
But you're right. Community is essential. And finding the people who are at the place who want to start building, laying the new groundwork and the foundation, we need to do a better job at finding each other.
And that's exactly right. And that is an action step. And this is kind of like what I'm trying to work out how to do, is just talk to everybody. And how do you do that best? We've got this thing called Zoom, but how do you best bring together? Because it doesn't have to stay like that. You might find the first group and it doesn't work. So
Right.
what?
Right.
Try again. And I hate to say it, I've talked with a few people and said, do you want to be specific about the types of people to start with? Yes, you might want to, because the idea for me is you kind of want a route. You know, you really want this route, like they would do with a business, for want of a better description, or like they do with like a multi-level marketing kind of thing. You want this
Right.
head there
Right.
that kind of has this ability to guide a little bit and be a teacher. And I
Mhm.
know that can be a slippery slope and sounds a little dangerous, but what I've realized, and one of the discussions I have here often with people is, you can't control, and you know, we should step completely away. But there is a point in this battle, or there is a point in this place in time we find ourselves where, as we realize we are outnumbered, we need to be a little bit more, I don't want to say aggressive, but I don't mean it, you know what I mean, assertive. We need to be a little bit more assertive, and we need to just not go, oh, it'll be all right, it'll find its way. You know what I mean? There needs to be a
Yeah.
balance between the flow of the universe and God, or whatever we're happy to call it, but also our divine power as humans to go, I can create, I will create, and I will be in some way in charge of that creation, not in
Mhm.
a authoritative, I'm going to stand over you and tell you how to think and do, but that I'm
Mhm.
going to say this needs a direction.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that there's
Right.
other people at that top of that can join together and say, Aaron, your direction's wrong. And we go, yeah, you're right. Let's go ahead that way. And then another person says, I'm not saying that there needs to be a figurehead in any way, shape, or form, but I believe our assertiveness lacks sometimes.
Mhm.
And we
Mhm.
kind of just meander while the other side
Yeah.
is in full force. And again, not to
Exactly.
focus on what they're doing, but if we meander,
Yeah.
then it's a choice we make to continue to watch what's going on. And I don't want to watch what's going on. I'd like to
Yeah.
put my energy
Participate.
with 15, 20, 100, 1,000 people
Mm.
in all having one single goal, and that is to either simplify this beautiful ancient knowledge, or to simplify the awareness process in our own journeys, or
Mhm.
take apart our own lives in little pieces and simplify that so that we can offer that, like you said, to a younger audience who can go,
Mhm.
that's why I'm questioning all this stuff I watch on the news, so that they might say, oh, well, maybe I can go that way. Not to
Mhm.
tell them how
Mhm.
to think, but to show them that it's safe to think and
Yeah.
to think.
It's I have been involved in different groups who are having similar conversations, a little bit different themes, different, as you said, different categories of thinkers and purposes. But I think that they all actually are underlying what we're discussing. The subject matter could be connected. I also feel that the people that I've shared space with who are saying similar things is we deeply recognize the ways in which culturally, societally at this point, we've gotten it wrong. And this idea of our leadership, really coming humanity coming to realize that a lot of people, not all, but a large portion of people within the aggregate that are involved in high level leadership haven't done a lick of inner work. And so the people who are doing the inner work, I think there's this realization that me or my friend or this group or these individuals, there's a sensing of, I think we're meant to be leading somehow. But
Lift
there's
you
a
up.
sense of within me, like I've been led astray and hurt and damaged by leaders and systems that I was told that were trustworthy. And if I'm being called, because I have spent many moons doing this inner processing work and continue to, oh, I always will. If I'm being called to some sort of position, it's one of those things where I'm trying to get okay. I'm trying to accept that what I have is what needs to be put out. And again, it's that level of, it's kind of the equal distribution, like the ratio in which I was led astray by people who within the system or within the culture I was supposed to trust, right? Or parental figures is like to the degree of pressure I'm putting on myself to make sure that what I'm putting out is coming out with as little projection as possible and as open-hearted as possible. And I think that I'm being a little too hard on myself, actually. And I think
Yeah,
that I need to just say, go out there, because what you've got is actually better than a lot of what's going on out there. And just find that courage that if you're continued to commit to the work forever, there's no better way that you could show up than just to admit your own vulnerability within the process and your commitment to continue to show up to do the work, no matter what position you're holding. And that's something that you don't see. You just don't see enough people that are holding the current positioning, admitting where they've fallen short, having honest conversation and dialogue, asking for forgiveness where forgiveness is due, and saying, look, I may have this position, but I am radically flawed, and I continue to actively seek out ways to be a better human, instead of showing this projection, that my surface level, my persona, my reflection is, what I'm presenting is really, really great. But meanwhile, all of these layers underneath are really need a deep amount of work. So for me personally, is just kind of feeling like I am prepared enough, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And to simplify it, we need to redefine the word leader, because we've all been told that leaders are presidents, prime ministers, ministers, police officers. Why? Who said so? Were these not at one point almost all of them elected officials? And in an election process, who has the power? The person voting.
Right.
So what's happened is that we have gotten caught up in this very simple definition of the word leader, and we put too much emphasis on what they do and how they lead. Leaders, if we go back to the Indigenous perspective, were the men who were the calmest and the quietest, who said very little and who acted.
Right.
You already are a leader. And this is what's happened, is we get caught up in this idea of what we're not, which is I'm not able to compete with this. I'm not able to. We don't need to.
We shouldn't. We shouldn't be competing with that.
No, we already are leaders. We're just, sadly for ourselves, we're in that place you talked about where we're not sure of how and where yet. And that this is why we do these talks, where you and I do this, because we're working it out. We're trying to work out. But if we remember that real change starts from an individual to a family, to a community, that is where the greatest power in our presence lies, not in an international Russell Brand scenario, because he's one man. If there are 500 of us acting within our community, acting and being an example, that has 10 times more of a ripple effect than any one Russell Brand. I hate to use him as an example, but any one figurehead, that is where leadership comes from. It's going to check on your orderly neighbor. These are those little things.
Little
showing
things.
Connection, showing empathy, and showing support for the people that you live with.
Right. And
because if we do that.
That's right. And that's, that's the leadership qualities that I'm excited to move away from, are the ones that are focused on self and legacy and look at me and what, let me try to be the best, and not really truly giving over their gifts to the next generation, giving over what they have to offer towards other institutions. You know that I'm really actively involved in aspects of the healthcare field from an outlier point of view. And it's been really difficult. And I think that I'll probably be putting a pin in it very soon for a little while, because I know so many fantastic doctors, providers who have such an exquisite skill and know that other institutions suffer, and they're still in the mentality of competition over cooperation. And I'm thinking, we're helping dying patients, and we're still in this model of competition over cooperation. If you know that someone else, and we need to be the best, we need to be the world's number one at this, and the world's it's like, to me, that system is, how can we possibly continue to live that way?
This is defining value. I mean, there's another word that probably talk about that. And this because it's about value. And that's because of marketing. That's because we need to be seen. We're after grants. We're after sponsorship. We're after support. We want a new wing. We want to buy a new piece of equipment. That all comes from money. And again, that's probably a conversation up we've talked about before for another time. That's big. And this is the stuff that I always take a breath with and kind of let go a little bit, because we used to talk a lot about the machine. And realistically, like when you talk about competition over cooperation, I hear it and it saddens me. I feel a weight kind of drop on me, because it is so true. But then take a big breath and you say, well, what can we do about it? And, you know, we
Right.
used to talk with your friend who was a doctor. And I think that this is the thing, was engaging the shining lights, the ones that you do know aren't, and trying to cultivate the idea of an evolution, which may not take place in our lifetime. And
Sure.
that's what you and I probably do get caught up in, this idea that we want to see the change in the next 5 years, and this
Yeah.
idea that playing the long game is what matters. And
Right.
true
Right.
leaders play the long game, because a true leader doesn't matter what gets seen in his or her lifetime. A
Right.
true leader wants to
Exactly.
see that in 40 years or 50 years or 60 years, that what
Right.
they may have done or started has taken fruit and changed the world.
Right.
And I think that, you know, because of the nature of human frailty, and that we know we're going to die, that ego will always try and grasp that little bit that says, oh, but I want to get this done before I go. I
Right.
don't think consciously, because I've never done that and said it out loud, but I believe that is one of the ego's tricky ways of playing us. And we've got to step back a little bit from that and remember that if we create, let's say, for example, we create a think tank that grew to 80 or 120 of the best minds, for want of a better description, that grew and took in new generations, and I left, that could be enough, because within that level of thinking with it, you know, anyway,
Yeah.
that's where I start thinking.
Yeah. I want to just, I don't want to keep you on too long, but we'll go a little bit longer if that's okay with you. And I wanted
I can go back and think.
to shift just for a second into something that's come up very recently for me that's felt slightly urgent. And I'm aware of the urgency projection as well, but it's been shown to me pretty significantly over the last several months. I've had younger men or mothers of younger men reaching out to me that they need help. And specifically, I had gone to Florida and done a brief amount of work with a physician in Florida, and I saw a mother and her son who experienced levels of anxiousness and depression stemming from Lyme's disease, but there was a significant obviousness of built up trauma and self regulation issues within the environmental dynamic as well, which I think is just completely obvious and needs to be addressed with anybody who has any illness at this point, is the environmental factors and the self regulation and the thoughts about trauma. But he was led down a road, seeing multiple doctors, trying different therapies, different drugs, very westernized Newtonian type of stuff, and ended up at more of a, I would say, you know, like a pioneering clinic towards more natural therapies. Still wasn't enough. And they ended up giving him, a doctor said, you know, you should try ketamine therapy. So he did, and this has cultivated this deep, dark downward spiral. And he and his mother claim that he is stuck in a K-hole, which I didn't know too much about this prior, but it makes complete sense because I do understand this kind of esoteric nature of ascension and disassociation and the spiritual bypass and flying in outer space and having a difficult time landing appropriately in your body. And so this poor young gentleman, he's 17 years old, he's been hunched over like this for, I think, over 8 months, hasn't lifted his head. He's stuck in this darkness, in this disassociative state. And it's very, very difficult to hear the road that they traveled and what had been offered. And I am excited that more of us who focus on this inner work and this stuff that's not seen, and how this maybe can be presented to help. Now, I've spoken to his mom quite a bit. His mom also is seeking out help for herself. Again, there's family traumas and issues as well. But this young gentleman has been so let down by the traditional medical system for his particular situation that he almost is refusing to see anybody medical. He wants to be with people who've lived it. And to me, I feel like this is such a desperate need for young men who are feeling depressed or anxious or overwhelmed, not only by their family history or whatever, but the cultural what we're facing culturally right now and societally and educationally, and the conditioning that's out there. So my ask to you is, I want to so desperately help. And there were several other young men. It's extreme anxiety, extreme depression, being medicated out the wazoo to where they barely can even have the motivation, that male masculine energy, warrior energy to fight for themselves is just gone. And I am desperately trying to find men to help initiate young men like these. I've got 4 or 5 of them right now, ages between like 17 and 27, who are desperately seeking a demonstration of a male role model who can help them through their own initiation. This is my clarion call, because this is what I'm seeing all over the place. And I feel like I ask, I sit and I ask God and I say, okay, why am I getting these calls? What can I do? And part of me feels like clarion call, use your voice, reach out to other men and tell other men who've been doing this work, we need to do something for the young men. The other thing is that I think I can provide what we talked about: the love, the empathy, the holding of the space while they're being initiated. I think there needs to be both.
You can create it. You're a creator of that space. And within that creator of that space is the connection that they need energetically. And then within that connection, then there's true empathy, because without connection, you will not get true empathy. It'll be ego driven. So that's what you can offer. And as far as, you're right, calling people in, when there's medication involved, it's a very difficult proposition, because it is a subdued mind. And so the parts of the mind that you need alive are being switched off. I've worked with many young men in this space, and I can keep them alive. And in all honesty, it's hit and miss. It's very much like drug addiction. Your percentages are very low, because the part of their mind that you need to engage, the part that needs to be healed, has been suppressed, has been shut down. And if there have been years of prescription medication, it's almost gone until they come off it. And we know the dangers, sadly, of coming off it. So the work can be done, but it needs to be done face to face. It needs to be done intensively in a space created. And for me, what would I like to do? I'd like to open up camps like I wanted to do here, but Western legal systems would mean that I would need untold amounts of money, because I would require a lawyer, because you would be taking them through what you just said, a rite of passage. And a rite of passage is not a bed of roses. Yeah, you need to detox these young men, and this is what probably almost all of them need. Almost every young man is a poison, whether it's not gambling, pornography, alcohol, drugs, prescription medication, and even ceremonial drugs are being abused these days. Social media, Instagram, all of this has become food, fast food. So you've got a detox process. You've got fasting involved, and it will work, guarantee it. But you've got to get some people to back you who are prepared to help you with that, because you can't in the Western world. So if we were in Thailand or somewhere like that, you would just go and do it, because there is no, you could here in the States, you need a state that would back you. You need someone probably politically connected to back you, because you need the safe environment to be able to work quite intensively. And it works. Works without a shadow of a doubt. But it's going back to the indigenous way of doing things. Now, I wouldn't say that I would additionally talk about traditional medicines as such, but when you talked about the guy with the ketamine, it could be one way. But I would start with Ayurvedic medicine. It's 5,500 years old. There is enough scriptural evidence. There is enough scientists. There are doctors flocking to it from all over the world who are now in general practice, especially in Italy, all through Europe, all going to India and doing 4, 5, 6 years in Ayurvedic universities, and now practicing both side by side.
Right.
That's what I would be doing. And I wouldn't hesitate in a second if someone would back me to do it. I'd open up centers in Australia. I'd open up a center in Queensland. I'd open up a center in the States. Wouldn't even think twice.
Yeah, that's the call. Yeah, that's the call I've been feeling. Is now I have several young women I work with as well. The need is different. Now, the underlying principles may be similar, but the need and the expression is different. And I really feel as though that's what I'd like to see, is kind of like, I don't want to call it a trauma center,
No, I would be calling it, like you said, the rite of passage. I would be going around something empowering. I don't
Right.
know if rite of passage would work because I think there would be a stigma attached to this idea of Indigenous, which we'd have to be careful with.
Right.
But it is definitely like none of us went through a coming of age per se.
Right.
And I don't know I don't know what terminology you would use. It wouldn't matter because your results would speak for themselves. And I probably wouldn't even focus too much on what I'd call it because the reality is it would work. It works.
Yeah, it does work. And there's just such a deep need. And some of these children, their parents haven't been through a rite of passage themselves, or they're just starting to deeply work on themselves as well. So, I see this in layers. I see that the immediate need for the young men and the young ladies, right? But I also see the need for the parents who want to go through it as well. But it needs to be separate before it's together.
Oh,
That's
for
how I
sure.
feel.
Like everything, like even in relationships with people, relationships counseling, you go off and do your own thing before you come back together because there's always going to be two individuals that need to organize and sort their own stuff out. This idea of couples counseling with the two people and not going off and dealing with your own is just basically reinforcing codependency,
Right, right,
reinforcing trauma bonds, etc. So, but
right,
look,
right.
speaking of these guys you're talking about these young men,
Yeah,
I talk about this grandiose and that it should be this and it should be that. I'm happy to talk to anyone at any time. And then if you
great.
put together a group, I would always show up. So I see the bigger picture as I believe if we really want to do something, we do need to be quite grand. But in the short term, that doesn't mean we turn away from the potential. I mean,
Right.
I
Well,
study
this
enough
is
of the Ayurvedic side to be able to help people in a simple way, at least
right.
give them some hope.
Exactly. That's where we need to
Hope
start.
motivates. Yeah.
Right. Now back east, I had several wellness studios, which was great because I could help anybody. And I had people knock on my door who said, "Hey, my daughter's getting out of jail. She's addicted to heroin. Can you help?" I don't have that here in Texas. And this one particular situation, the mother said to me, "Well, I think that, we need to come to you." I think and I'm thinking to myself, all right, is this time that I really need to start thinking about a space? Because, again, if somebody needs help, they could get a hotel and I could figure it out, right? We could make
Mm.
it work, no problem. But I'm trying to feel what's coming to me. And what I'm realizing is what you said is there needs to be some face-to-face potential.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Look, this is beautiful. The digital age for connection, and it's beautiful for education and teaching. It is beautiful to do subtle parts, but when you really get down to it, to make a real true impact with people, you need to connect. There needs
Yeah.
to be that real. It's you can do in 7 days face to face what could take you a year, and
Right.
the downside to digital is that they may not show up, that their anxiety may become too great and they go away. Whereas when you start to go into a space and they come to you and there is that, it becomes a home for them. This isn't a
Mm-hmm.
home per se. You can become a safe place as a person, but it's nowhere near the same as them stepping through into that space that you've created
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
being able to breathe and know that that's home for them. And that's why, look, I've tried this and I don't discount it. I still use it as a tool and I would never stop doing it. But the power of face to face,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and touch, a
Mm-hmm.
hug, we know the power of a hug, we know
Mm-hmm.
these things. But
Mm-hmm.
we've adapted and kind of used these tools put before us because they have expanded our reach and they have given us a beautiful extension of what we're doing. But if we really want to be honest about success rates and not just about the marketing hype of what I can do and whether it
Mm-hmm.
really works,
Mm-hmm.
we have to come back more to this localized community face-to-face work, or if we're able and people can fly in or whatever, but there needs to be.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about, just came through what certain detox drug rehab centers are like, if they would have room or be willing to open up their programs towards different types of work like this, like
I would
something that's already established, maybe.
I would think so, especially if you're talking about the Ayurvedic side, which would be the basis for any, would be the basis, would be the basis for the bulk of anything I did with, I would have my own methods and tools and my own experiences involved, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't see why not. Again, what it takes is a collaboration of people. When you're unified and you come together with, you've got the connection, you've got doctors,
Mm-hmm.
You've got people within a scientific field when you can start to put together these people and we can start to educate them on these things, and they can start to say, all right, you've planted a seed. Let me go and have a look at this. You know, there is enough evidence there to back what we're talking about. And there is the potential and enough time in our lives to talk about it in more detail, where we can explore this fully and not just talk about it.
Right, right. So me and this one gentleman are putting together just like a PowerPoint presentation that's trying to really simplify the outer work and the inner work. We're called the great work, which is the inner and the outer work, and trying to set out some sort of presentation that maybe we could apply or share with other people. Because again, there's a lot of people in the medical field that don't have any idea what it is that we're actually saying. I mean, they'll have a concept of what we're saying or an idea of the need, but not nearly as clarified as what we can bring to them. So I think that what I'd like to do is introduce you to some of these people at some point and see if maybe we can have some, again, think tank or just kind of get together and see what can be birthed. You know what I mean? Because I have some people who now it feels like, you know, you feel like an extension of me similarly and differently. These other people are starting to feel like extensions and really close. And, you know, if we could come together and put something together, some sort of proposal or something really clear, and start to just share it with different hospital institutions or different programs or different rehab centers, places that already have a large existing structure. And then maybe, or maybe it works out different. Maybe something happens and we get some sort of funding to start doing things within our community, what have you. But there are a lot of places that are pre-existing.
And this will happen when we talk, when you could do the connection and then you take it from there. And this is that idea that with the amount of time we've got is I literally just book talking to people now. If the person seems like the wrong person, I talk to them anyway. And I know very quickly, I just short talks, just keep talking, because that collaboration will only expand. It'll expand and contract as necessary as you move along the path and the journey, but it's not going to do anything if we just sit still and wait. No one's going to come and knock on our door and say, here's a ton of money, or hang on, I've got a hospital that's got a new wing or an old wing that's been open. We want to look at it. No one's going to do that. We have to go asking. We have to go knocking. And like I said, assertively, sometimes we've even go do a little bit of kicking, you know, just be a little bit more.
I think that if what I'd like to consider is, because I do feel like I have a pretty big abstract goal that I'm working towards, and it might not look like this, but to have that vision is important, is if we could have some recurring conversations and put together a collaborative proposal, and then just take it within our own communities and see what we can do with it, and share with each other what's working. This isn't working. This helped, and just kind of do it together.
Yeah, it sounds like a plan to me.
All right. Cool.
And like I said, if you've got other people, let's bring them in and talk. Because like I said, the more minds we throw at this and the more even devil's advocates you have at play, the better. You have one upside over me, and that is that you live in an incredibly opportunistic environment. Yeah, I don't know what Texas is like. I don't know enough. Yeah, I was gonna say, it doesn't ring huge bells that it's open in Texas, but in Australia, with such a small and limited population, and post-COVID, I don't know. I just try to talk to people here, and what I get is very much a small town mentality. When you talk to Americans, they don't have that limited perspective.
I see.
They're prepared to go much bigger. So that's why I tend to want to deal with and collaborate with people on the other side of the world, because they just don't have this small town mentality. When it comes to something like this, because if we're going to put something together, I'd like it to, like you said, we talked about in the beginning, I'd like it to be grand. And then we can break it up into smaller parts.
Yeah, what would be awesome, I feel, is if, I mean, I know we might all have different nuances that we bring to the table, which is important, but actually a lot of our nuances, when I'm thinking about these individuals, could all live in one organization for different people. So what if we came up with an organization and then we just funneled it to where we were community wise?
And like I said, with those different types of personalities and energies, is you see who rises and falls and who does what and where. And what we talk about is subject, who peaks and who doesn't, and celebrate each one of the strengths and weaknesses within that organization, because it is
Mm-hmm.
just but a living, breathing thing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, then that also magnifies the motivation, and the fears that you may have once felt as an individual are not as strong as they used to be because you're now combined. It
Mm-hmm.
is, in essence, tapping into the tribal part of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is, and that is what I like to see more of.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got 5 people standing on a Zoom call or in a video on Instagram talking about the same thing, or arguing and talking about it, but in essence having the same conversation, to me that is a lot more potent than one guy standing there just because he went to prison and just because he did this, talking about his experiences and telling you the way it should be. I think when people start to see a unified connection
Mm-hmm.
between a community talking about, and even, like I said, disagreeing respectfully with each other, I believe that has more potency.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Everything
Yeah.
is one person. I did this, and me. And I think I'd love to see a lot more we.
Yeah. Yeah. If we could put our energies together collectively and be able to hash out those conversations, but really amplify what it is we're all trying to do, because we're all, in essence, not quite sure how this looks out there. It's like there's the information's great. We've helped, we've been working with people for years. We've seen results. It's tried and true, but we're not quite sure how to really birth it out there because it really doesn't exist the way we'd like to see it. So yeah, collectively, definitely amplification of this energy and just see where we can go. So I think that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and the more people we bring, the more likely we're going to come across that person who has a connection to something that we never thought previously. This is the other thing, is we connect, the connection then sort of expands outwards, and we don't know who's going to stumble across us, who's going to watch something that's put out there, and we won't know until we create it and put it out there.
Okay, awesome. That sounds great.